Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to co-sponsor this presentation today with NOAA's Pride Employee Resource Group. They are sponsoring a number of professional development webinars through the library over the next several months. So please keep your ear to the ground for more upcoming seminars. But today, I am delighted to have Amanda McCarty, who is going to be talking about navigating USAJobs announcements, a hiring manager's perspective. But first, some logistics. Since you are an attendee, you will be muted throughout. The only way to ask questions or get some technical help would be to put questions into the question panel or to put them in the chat panel. If you do have technical issues, as in you can't hear or you can't see the slides, please try logging off GoToWebinar and logging back in. That solves most issues. I also want everyone to know that we are recording this today. It will be posted on the library's YouTube channel after the event. And yes, we will be sharing the slides. Amanda has very graciously said that I can send them out to everyone who wants a copy. Please just email library.seminars@noaa.gov and I will put that in the chat as well, and we will send you a copy of the slides. Now, Amanda serves as the Fishery Monitoring and Research Division Chief at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. She oversees the division's full portfolio, which includes fisheries observing and monitoring programs, cooperative research, and collaborative agreements with academia and research organizations to conduct scientific research in support of sustainable fishery management. She has been lucky to hire over 24 federal employees in the past 5 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
All right, hello everybody. Thank you for all joining in today. I'm very excited to talk to you about something that I've spent a lot of time learning how to do over the past year, which is hiring people into the last couple years, which is hiring people into the federal government. Along the way, I've learned a lot of things that work and don't work. So these are from a hiring manager's perspective. I am not an HR professional. That is not my background. So if you have questions along those lines, I can refer you to other people who are better able to answer those. But what I've become somewhat of a knowledgeable person in is how to not accidentally get yourself kicked out of the federal job hiring process. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today comes from mistakes that I've seen people make along the way. Some of them I've made myself as a person searching for a federal job. And so this is kind of the how do you learn from other people's mistakes and you know, get a chance to be considered for a federal job talk. So with that, I'm going to use a USA job announcement that's outdated. It's one that we put on the street a while ago and are hiring off of right now. But I'm going to use that as a way to walk through what it looks like to apply for a job and where people can make mistakes. I would like to start off that the first thing you need to do when you're applying for federal jobs is create a USAJobs portfolio. And so you can go to USAJobs.gov. There are a bunch of videos out there on how to do that. I'm not going to spend time talking about that because there are great videos out there to do that. What I'm going to talk about is once you're in USAJobs, when you find jobs you're interested in, then how do you put together an application package? So with that, I'm going to take you to the first thing that you'll see when you look at any job announcement on USAJobs, and that is kind of this title piece. So you'll see something like this. This is a job that was posted 2 different ways, and I'm going to talk about what each of those ways mean. So I'm going to walk you through the anatomy of this title. Think of this as like the abstract of the job announcement. So for this position, it is a Marine Resources Management Specialist position. That corresponds to the number 0401. It's a job series in the government. It has a specific set of requirements and qualifications and activities that are associated with it. And the title gives you a sense of what it looks like. But if you want to know more about what that job title means in general, you can, look online. There's usually a button on a job announcement where it says learn more about this series, or you can, Google OPM, which is the Office for Personnel Management, and type in the number, either like in this case 0401, or the title Marine Resources Management Specialist, and it will give you the official government description of what this job title means. The other thing that I wanted to point out on on this title is the piece that says ZP. So if you look right here, you can see ZP. In NOAA, we use the Commerce Alternative Personnel System for the most part. We also do GS, but I'm going to focus in on the CAP system here today because a lot of this applies to both, but this is the one that NOAA predominantly uses and where I have my experience in hiring. There are 4 different series, 4 different sort of job lines, groupings that can occur. So the ZP is sort of the professional track, and that usually is corresponding with specialized experience in education. There's an administrative track, which, it's still professional work, but it tends to have more administrative nature or not as much of an educational, it doesn't have an educational requirement. There's a ZS, which stands for secretarial, and that tends to be more administrative, secretarial, clerical work. And then there's a ZT, which is the technician series, and that tends to be more technical type work. And so when you're looking at that piece of the job description, the ZP versus ZA versus ZT versus ZS, that leads you down a specific path of work. And so it's something that's important to pay attention to. The other piece that I wanted to flag for you, and I put up 2 different job titles so you can see the difference here, is this piece that says DE/CR and MAP. So MAP is open to, you see these boxes over on the side, a variety of people, but primarily it's open to federal employees who have competitive service. This is what people generally think of it as, is like you're already a federal employee or you are a federal employee and have standing as a federal employee. And so this is sort of it's called merit promotion. It means that basically you are already in the federal government, you're tenured in the federal government. It's also open to individuals with disabilities under a specialist hiring authority, people who are in a career transition process, people who were formerly term or temporary employees in land or base management agencies, military spouses, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, VISTA, special authorities, and veterans. But generally, if you have a special authority or you are a federal employee or are a federal employee, then you want to apply for this MAP job. The DE job is the more broadly open job announcement. And this is open to those who are in career transition, but the public. So basically, anybody who's a US citizen, national, or who owes allegiance to the US, and there are specific definitions of this, but generally speaking, this is, if you're a US citizen or national, this is where, and you don't have the federal status or you are not a veteran, this is where you want to apply. You can apply to both. If you meet the one of these requirements down here in terms of being a veteran, a military spouse, you can apply to MAP and you can apply to the DE list. So, but you can only apply to the DE list and be considered if you do not meet one of these special hiring status. So it's really important to pay attention to this because I've seen people in the past who don't have any federal status apply to the MAP job and then be like, I didn't make the list of the certificate of eligible candidates. Why didn't that happen? It's like, well, you didn't apply for the right job announcement. And so this is a really important thing to pay attention to when you're applying for a job. The next thing is there's an overview section of the position. And so this part tells you when the job opens and closes. It tells you where it is on the pay scale. And again, if you go to the Office of Personnel Management, you can look up the pay scales. You can figure out where the salary starts and stops and where the different jumps are. But fortunately, in the job announcement, they also include that information for you right here. It talks about whether or not it's a permanent job, a term job, or a temporary job. It talks about whether or not it's full-time or part-time or seasonal. It talks about whether or not it's a competitive job that anyone can apply to, or if there's a specific type of people who can apply. So sometimes, you'll see, this is only open to employees in the same agency, or this is only open to people who fall in this category. So it's really important to pay attention to this because I've seen people apply for jobs and they're like, well, I want a permanent job. And it's like, well, sadly, you applied for a term job. So you can either have the term job or nothing, but we can't make a job permanent that's advertised as a term or a temporary job. Sorry about that. The other piece is locations and vacancies. So under here, it will tell you how many vacancies they're looking to fill. This is a goal statement. It's not we guarantee we're going to fill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 positions, but it's usually this is how many people are affiliated with the job announcement when it hits the street, and it tells you the possible locations that the work can be done from. So in this case, Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and Narragansett, Rhode Island were the two options. That means that if you apply for this job, those are the two places where your duty station could be. You can't apply for the job and then say, oh, but I want to work somewhere else because it's been advertised this way. It also tells whether or not a telework is eligible. So it might say that your duty station is Woods Hole, but you are telework eligible. And that means that you have the ability to work remotely and report back to your duty station, for example. Another piece that you'll find here is whether or not relocation expenses are reimbursed. So if you're looking to make a cross-country move for a job, but you can only do it if they cover relocation expenses, pay attention to this piece because you don't want to apply for that job if you're not willing to move unless your costs are covered. The next key piece is duties. And so the duties of the position this is your best summary of what the job will look like. Now, I often get a lot of questions about this area because there's not a lot of information that we can put in here and a lot of it's standardized. So I'm going to highlight the things that I think are important to pay attention to. It tells you where in the organization the position it is. It repeats the number of vacancies and the geographic location. It also tells you if a position has been announced under more than one announcement. So remember the MAP DE thing that I mentioned earlier? This is an example where, I can't remember if this is the MAP announcement or the DE announcement, but it's basically saying this position was announced both MAP and DE. And so in this case, this was the MAP announcement, and it's saying, but it's also open under a DE announcement, which is open to all US citizens or nationals. And it says you must apply to both announcements if you want to be considered for both. So you can't just apply for one and make both lists. You have to apply for both if you're eligible to apply for both. The other thing that's really important under the duties section is the responsibilities section. Now, these are the types of things that you would do in the job. A hiring manager gets very little space to write out the job description. And so as a result, what you'll find is usually like 3 to 5 short bullets of saying, here's what the job looks like. And the hiring manager does the best that they can within the, what's allowed by HR and the word count to try and tell you what the job looks like. These are the types of things that you should use to see if you're interested in the job. You want to try and to some extent reflect these in your resume or your cover letter. But this part is really giving you a sense of what you're applying for. The other pieces that are important here are the travel required. It tells you, if you're going to be able to travel or required to travel. It tells you if it's a supervisory position and if it has any promotion potential. So, one thing that's important to remember in the CAP system, and for those who are, used to the GS system, there are sort of different ways of moving through CAPs versus GS. So a Z2 position like this corresponds to a GS 910 position. A Z3 position corresponds to an 1112. A Z4 position corresponds to a GS 1314, and a Z5 corresponds to a GS 15. So when you look at a pay band 2 position, or a pay band 3 or 4 or 5, what you're seeing is for the 2, 3, and 4, you have 2 GS levels in there. So if you apply as a Z2, you have the ability to start as a GS 9 and move up to a GS 10, but you can't move to the next band, which would be a 3. And so some positions you'll find will actually have promotion potential built in. It'll be a Z2/3 position. And that means that you could start as a GS 9, go up to a 10, go up to 11, and all the way to a 12 within that same job without having to apply for anything else. And so it's an important thing to look at because that can give you a lot more growth opportunity. It also means that you can bring people in. As a hiring manager, you can bring someone in and your goal is to have them potentially be at that higher level, but you're bringing them in at the lower level and you're willing to train them. The requirements section is the section where you really need to pay attention. This is where you need to start paying attention to how you're answering the questions, how you're putting together your resume, because this is where people get kicked out. All right, this is where, and the word requirements really does mean requirements. So don't think of this as we're encouraging you to do this. Think of this as like, you've got to do this. And so when you're looking at the requirements section, what you need to do is make sure you're a US citizen or a national. This is true for every job. You're required to pass a background investigation and fingerprint check. True for every job. Suitable for federal employment. There's a whole bunch of things that are considered as part of this, and there's people in the HR world that check this. Must be registered for selective service if applicable. One thing to remember, to pay attention to, because we've seen people get kicked out because they are not registered for selective service and need to be. So basically the rules are, if you are a male born on a certain date, before a certain date, then you need to be registered for selective services. If you had a way to not be registered, if you meet those qualifications but are not registered and have a way out, there is a process that you can go through, and there's information that you can follow up on at this www.sss.gov website to show that you did not have to register for selective service. Again, I mentioned that it's related to males, and so this doesn't apply to females because of the requirement. The other thing that I think is really important to pay attention to is your time and grade or band must be met by the closing date of the announcement. So if you are applying for a pay band 3 position and it says you have to have a year of experience at the pay band 2 in order to be eligible for the pay band 3, and the closing date of the announcement is 1 day before you meet that requirement, you are technically not eligible based on your time and grade. So it's incredibly important to actually pay attention to when your start dates were if you've already been a federal employee. The next thing on this slide that I wanted to highlight is, again, it talks about the CAP system. I sort of talked to you about that a little bit, but then there's also sort of additional nuances here. And so it really gives you a sense of like what your promotion potential is and how you will be considered. Often it will include a note about your probationary period. Again, it highlights whether or not relocation expenses are authorized. It will tell you if the position is or is not in a bargaining unit. So basically, you know, that's an important thing for some people to pay attention to, because some people do want to be in a bargaining unit and others do not. It will also talk about the level of security clearance that is needed. And so you can then, you know, again, by Googling and looking at OPM and other websites, you can figure out what the requirements are in general. But a low risk security clearance, for example, is something that everyone has to have regardless to work in. And then it can go up from there to like secret, top secret, moderate risk, and things like that. There will also be, you know, it's also really important to pay attention to the conditions of employment. In this case, the position requires the operation of a federal motor vehicle. In other cases, it might require the ability to lift something, or it might require the ability to travel, or it might require the ability to do X, Y, Z. You want to make sure that you meet those conditions of employment. And then finally, remember I said like ZP, ZA, ZT, ZS, if the ZP positions are based and you're applying based on your education to meet the requirements of the position, then you're going to be required to provide college transcripts that show the courses that you've completed that contribute to you meeting the requirements of the position based on your education. You are allowed to submit an unofficial copy of the transcripts when you apply, but once you get the job offer, you have to be able to submit an official transcript at that point in time. If you're applying for a ZA position and there's no educational requirement, then this piece isn't relevant. Continuing on in the requirements section is the qualification piece. And remember, I've been talking about the Office of Personnel Management a lot. So this is opm.gov. This is where you go if you have any high-level questions. And so here it's giving you a link to the handbook, and it's telling you about the qualification standards. Most people don't read this, but it can be sort of interesting to read it to give you a sense of what the HR people will be looking at when they review your package. The basic requirements, so I'm showing you a ZP position right now that has a positive education requirement. which means that it's asking for you to have a degree in a specific field. And so this is saying that you have to have at least 1 year of specialized experience or a substitution of education for your experience or a combination of the two. And so there's a lot of ands and ors here. But basically, if you are using education to say that you are qualified for a biology position because you have a biology degree, then you have to provide your transcript requirements. And then it tells you specifically what your transcript needs to show. So to qualify for this series, which is a 401, you have to have a degree in one of the following areas: biological science, agriculture, natural resource management, or a related discipline. I highly recommend that if you do not have a degree with the title that is listed here, that you consider including a cover letter or a description of your transcripts that describes how what you've done meets these requirements, because it makes it a lot easier. There's also a way to say, I don't actually have a degree in biological sciences, but I took X number of courses and I have additional experience. And so this is how I would qualify and meet that education requirement. And so there's a couple ways to do this. The degree is the easiest if you have it. If not, then you can do this education and experience. The HR people seem to be very good at making sense of this. But remember that they're evaluating people on every type of job possible. And so as a result, the more you can make their job easier, the more that they, I'm sure, will appreciate it. Now, at the bottom of this piece, there's an and this and is incredibly important. And so I wanted to flag it for everyone, because the specialized experience section of the job announcement is the piece that I see people miss the most, because it's buried in all this text. And it's one of the places where I see people get disqualified the most. So in order to apply for the job, this one says you must possess 1 year of specialized experience equivalent in difficulty and responsibility to the next lower grade in the federal service. So that's where you can go to those OPM charts and figure out what that exactly means. But it's basically saying you need to demonstrate that you have the ability to do this. It doesn't have to have been in the federal government, but you have to have it on your resume. It's really important. It can be volunteer work, it can be a job, it can be, anything that's truly relevant. And then if you look right here, this is where it tells you exactly what it needs to look like. It says, to qualify at the ZP2 or GS9 level, in addition to meeting the basic requirements above, you must have 1 full year, 52 weeks, not 51 weeks, 52 weeks of specialized experience equivalent to the ZP2 or GS7 level in the federal service. And it must include all of the following. In this case, it's things like assisting in the execution of environmental science monitoring or information system projects, and contributing to the development of advanced technologies in support of fishery monitoring and reporting. If you do not very clearly show on your resume that you have this experience, you can get disqualified. Unless you can show that you have, in this case, a substitution of education, which is 2 years of progressively higher level graduate education leading to a master's degree or master's or equivalent graduate degree, or a combination of education and experience. And so what the thing here is, there's a lot to this, and I know there's so many ands and ors and whatnot, but this piece right here is where I see people make a mistake, because what they often do is they put in their education and they put their resume together just like they normally put it together, but they don't really say, like, I contributed to the development of advanced technologies in support of fishery monitoring and reporting. They might say something really nuanced, like, I contributed, I supported operations of electronic monitoring for the herring fishery. And that technically is one of these things that does actually contribute to the development of advanced technologies in support of fishery monitoring and reporting. For those of you who aren't fishery people, just trust me, it does. But it's not apparent. Another mistake, and that's helpful to the HR people. You do have the ability to appeal some of these HR decisions if you aren't deemed qualified, but it doesn't always work out that you can get yourself added back into the pool. So the more that you can be clear that you do these things, these specialized experience things that you must do, the better. The other thing that I see people do is say, oh, I did a postdoc at such and such organization, and that organization does this, but you haven't explicitly said what you did in your postdoc. Or you say, I volunteered on the board of X, Y, and Z, but you didn't explicitly say what you did in your volunteer work. So you really have to spell this out. These are the things that I see people get kicked out on quite often. All right, so the next thing, moving on to the evaluation of the positions. So you will be evaluated for this job based on how well you meet the qualifications above, and then they will do some sort of review. So you are able to put in a cover. The resume is required, a cover letter is optional, and so both of those things will be, included in the process and reviewed. But oftentimes there's also a questionnaire. So in every federal job announcement, there's a questionnaire that says, have you been a federal employee before? Have you done XYZ? What's the highest level you've held? And it's a standard set of questions. But on some job announcements, there's also technical questions that are laid out. And that's called the occupational questionnaire. And you don't provide a written response on it. You actually answer a bunch of questions. So when you go into apply, you'll actually be prompted to answer those questions. But when you're looking at the announcement, there's a spot that says to preview questions, please click here. And so you can click on that. And what it will do is ask you questions related to a bunch of different topics. So the hiring manager puts together a list of things that they want to know about the candidate, and then they work with the HR representative to put together questions. And this list is the list, for example, that I, as a hiring manager, along with my team, put together. And then it came up with questions that look like this. And it's like, do you have experience doing X, Y, Z? And I have a lot, I have little. Please describe how your experience is on X, Y, Z. I have none, I have some. It's really important to be honest on these questions. It's also really important to not undersell yourself on these questions. Don't oversell, because HR will knock you down. They read this and they'll look at your resume and they'll pull your questions down if you say, I'm an expert, but you don't have anything on your resume showing that. But it also is important to not undersell yourself. And I remember one time I was applying for a job, and my husband's actually also a federal employee, so I lean on him sometimes when I'm putting together a resume or something. And there was a question that was like, are you an expert in Spanish? And I am conversational in Spanish. And so, I have some experience in speaking Spanish, on a regular basis. And my husband's like, you studied abroad overseas. Some experience is limited. And I was like, well, I'm not a native speaker. And he's like, well, they're not asking you to be a native speaker. And my husband's fluent in Spanish. So, I trust his assessment of this. He's a well-informed person to advise me on this. And based on talking with him, I bumped it up a level in my response. So I highly recommend that you consider asking someone who is well-versed, or someone who cares about you, like where they think you fall, and don't just trust your answers to these questions individually, because you want to get the answers to these right. All right, so the next piece where problems can happen is around the required document section. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this piece right here about the resume, because there are so many things that go wrong on this piece. And I have had heartbreaking moments where amazing candidates have reached out to me and they have said, I didn't put my salary down and they excluded me. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, because under the required documents, it says you have to have a resume showing your relevant experience, and it must do all of the following. It must indicate your citizenship. Don't forget to put what your citizenship is. Don't forget to put if you're registered for selective service, if you're a male born after 12/30/159. Please do not forget to put information about your job title, duration of employment in the month, day, year to month, day, year format. Please do not forget to put the hours per week. Please do not forget to put duties and accomplishments. You don't need to title it duties and accomplishments, but please make sure they're there. Most people don't forget that. Please don't forget your salary, and please don't forget a section on your education. Even if your education was a long time ago, please don't forget it, because you can get disqualified, and it happens all the time. So it's really important to do that. If you have been any of these jobs in the federal service, they encourage you to include the grade level for the positions. It's just a standard practice to do that, so it's kind of best to leave it on there. I haven't seen anyone be excluded for not including that, but it's a good thing to put on. This is probably the #1 area where I see people getting excluded. The SF50 is another thing. If you are a current or former federal employee, you must provide an SF50. If you don't provide this, you are ineligible and you cannot be considered. If you're a veteran, make sure that you submit your member 44DD 214 and so on, because otherwise you will not be considered as a veteran. And there are preferences that you get as a veteran that you are entitled to. So make sure you put in the documentation so you can be considered with those in mind. If you're an active duty service member, again, requirements of what you need to submit, same for career transition and so on. So if you are trying to apply under a special hiring authority, make sure that you provide the required documentation, because if you don't include it, you can't be considered under that hiring authority. All right, education. I mentioned this earlier, you're gonna have to provide your transcripts at the end. They have to fall in line with certain rules, okay? They have to be an accredited institution. It has to include your grades, the completion dates, quarter and semester hours earned. If you have gotten a foreign education at any point and you're using that for the job announcement, you must pay attention to being sure that you meet all the requirements of that. There's a lot more information that you can get by clicking on the links in the announcement. You can look for the schools accredited by accrediting institutions for the Department of Education. And then you must provide a copy of the letter about the equivalency evaluation. If you do not do this, you will not be considered. And so please make sure that you include this. People get excluded because of this. The other thing is there are optional documents that you can put in. You won't be excluded if you don't include these. The cover letter is one of them. You don't need to put in a cover letter. It can add value. If you put together a really bad cover letter, it can hurt you. But in general, a cover letter can be really helpful in showing why you want the job, why you think you're qualified, and making sense of your resume, explaining your transcripts or anything. It can be a really useful thing. You can include a performance evaluation, your most recent performance evaluation, if you'd like. And you can include copies of awards you received. These things could help you in the process, and there's a place to load these. Benefits, it's important to pay attention to this section because, well, federal benefits are generally noted to be pretty great, but there's specific benefits that come during the hiring process around relocation and recruitment. A relocation incentive is if you actually get paid to move. Recruitment incentives can be different types of incentives. They can be things like leave enhancement so that you can get additional time considered for your leave accrual rate based on work you've done elsewhere. It can be, a relocation incentive can be a full move, it can be a partial move, and so this will tell you if any of those things are on the table. It also notes that the benefits are dependent upon the nature of the position, and you should ask questions of the hiring agency if you have those. So this is where the HR people are important. The how to apply part, this area is really important, and it's another place where I see people do a lot of panic because your complete application, including all the documents, must be received by 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on the closing date of this announcement. You don't get Pacific time if you're out in Seattle. I'm sorry, you don't get, any other time just because you're there. It's Eastern time, 11:59 p.m. And it's really important to try and do things ahead of time because things can go wrong in the system. Sometimes things don't load and whatnot. So I always encourage people to try not to wait till the last minute. I have seen multiple people try to apply for the job on the last day, in the last hour, and not get everything in time. You can go back to your USAJobs account and you can click on the application status and it will tell you where you are in the process. If it's, if you've been referred, that means that HR has decided you're eligible and they're passing you on to the hiring manager. And then it will tell you if you've been selected or not selected when final decisions are made, for example. So it's a very good way to know what's going on. If you have problems, you can use the help desk. There's contacts here. There's always an agency contact person. This is someone who sits in HR, who is the official point of contact. The hiring manager is not the official point of contact. We have very limited ability to say anything while a job is being announced about it, because anything that we say could give one candidate more access and understanding of the position than another. So the goal is to treat everyone fairly. So these numbers are the numbers and people you want to call for help if something goes wrong. It's another reason why you don't want to wait until the last minute to get it in, though, is because it might take a little bit for the people to get back to you. All right, so then after this, there's a piece called Next Steps, and this tells you what to expect. One thing that NOAA pretty much always does at this point in time is include what I call the magic language. And this is language that says this job opportunity announcement may be used to fill other Marine Resource Management Specialist ZP 0401/2 positions throughout NOAA. The positions must be alike within the same geographic region, same grade and band, and require the same qualifications and specialized experiences indicated in this vacancy announcement. As a hiring manager, I call this the magic language, because if I have a job on the street that's advertised 6 positions and I get approval because of my budgets and my hiring plan to hire 8 positions instead at this level, I can use this job announcement to hire additional people. I have done this multiple times. It's awesome because the process of advertising a job is long. And so from my perspective as a hiring manager, it can be a great thing to do. But it can also be, as an applicant, challenging because you're like, wait, I didn't know that job was going to be hired off of this. So what I encourage people to do is, if you're interested in a job, apply for it, because it might be the job you think it is, or it might be that job and something else. I've seen offices hire off of other offices' job announcements doing this. So it's a great way for us to streamline the hiring process, bring on great people a little bit faster who are going to do similar work in a similar place. Again, I mentioned you can track your application through the USAJobs portal. And so, it's your application's received or incomplete. Another reason to do it early, because once it's received, you'll know it's received. And then it will tell you if you've met the minimum qualifications or not. And then it will tell you if you're eligible or ineligible, and that means you're sent to the hiring manager, the selecting official. And then it will tell you if you're selected or not selected. You can call the HR person if you aren't moving forward and ask them why. Most of these people are really good at their jobs, and generally speaking, I've seen people get added to certificates of eligibles to candidate lists, but oftentimes there's a reason someone hasn't made it on a job a job certificate list, and so they can give you that information. And so then like, hey, the reason I didn't make it is because I forgot to put my salary on my resume. And so then next time not to make that same mistake again. And then you can be better positioned to apply for the next language. It does tell you that you have to tell the truth on this. Just don't lie. Don't lie. You have to tell the truth, and you have to be prepared to submit official documentation in order to complete the hiring process. Now, I've talked mostly about MAP and DEs at this point in time, which are the general paths for hiring, but I did want to take one moment to go on the side and talk about direct hires. So NOAA has what's called direct hiring authority for a couple of different job series. And so, for example, the Natural Resource Management Specialist, the 401, Fisheries Biologist is another one, that's a 482. There are some 2210s, which is IT Specialist. There's a list of types of jobs where NOAA has gotten approval because we have such a need for them to do what's called direct hire. And direct hire is kind of a different process. Most of the job announcement is going to look exactly the same. And it's almost going to look like a DE job announcement, so the public and people who are in career transition can apply for it. What makes direct hire interesting is 2 things. First of all, category rating, veterans preference, and traditional rating and ranking of applicants do not apply to this public announcement. So the first piece of that is that preferential hiring authorities, veterans preference being the most noted of them, don't apply in these jobs. So if you have veterans preference, you don't have any more preference than anyone else for a direct hire authority. Also, category rating and traditional rating and ranking of applicants doesn't apply. And that's the second piece that's interesting, because what happens normally when people apply for a federal job is that the HR office goes through all the applications and it screens out the list of people who are interested, and it takes the people who are qualified and it gives us a list. And it's a gold list. Those are the people who are the best qualified. And it's a silver list, and those are the people who are next best qualified. That doesn't happen with direct hire. The hiring manager, the selecting official, gets the entire list of everyone who applied who was minimally qualified. So on a MAP or a DE certificate, I'll often get 5, 6, 7, 10, maybe 20 people. On a direct hire certificate, I'll get 150 candidates to look at. And so direct hire gives a hiring manager a much bigger pool, and it allows a wider variety of people to apply because the ratings and preferences and be considered, because the ratings and preferences do not apply to the notice. And so a direct hire announcement is a way to mostly bring in new people into the federal government in areas where we have a significant need. Just to further state this, veterans preference doesn't apply to direct hire recruitment procedures. They're going to look over your resume, cover letter, and supporting documentations to see if you meet the minimum requirements, and then they're going to send you through. And so you will be processed as a new appointment to the civil service. It's, and then you're a federal employee just like everyone else. And there is a 1-year probationary period under direct hire authority unless you're already, a federal employee. The other thing is all those questions that gets asked earlier on, the questions of like, I'm an expert, I'm really good at this, I'm pretty good at this, I am okay, and I have no experience. None of those questions apply to direct hire positions because that's what the HR people use to evaluate candidates and rate them. So the questions will be more the standard questions of, have you ever been a federal employee before? If so, at what level? All right, so that's it in terms of what I wanted to share with you today. I will take questions from you. I did number my slides, so if you're paying attention to what slide you have a question on, I can try and go back to the slides and make sure to talk about things more. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because usually when I give a talk like this, I let people interject questions all along. So we'll see how this works. I also wanted to thank NOAA Pride for inviting me to give this presentation. NOAA Pride is an employee research group, resource group focused on supporting the needs of NOAA, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning community and its allies. And so if you are interested in being part of NOAA Pride or joining their mailing list, you can go to the Google site that I highlighted below to learn more about that organization. And I just wanted to thank them for inviting me and for the really important work that they do to make NOAA a more inclusive and welcoming place for everyone. So with that, I will turn it over for questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. This was awesome. And we did have a ton of questions. I'm going to wade through as many as I can until our 3:30 cutoff. But if we don't get to your question, please know I will pass this on to Amanda offline. So to get started, our first question was interested in learning more about what career conditional means in lay terms.
So career conditional so this is where the HR people are really important. But so my lay terms do not translate to HR terms, but career conditional means that you get to become a career employee and it's conditional on something. And in my experience, that's been on being an employee for a certain amount of time and having good performance. And so, and then, you've probably heard about like being tenured into the federal government. It's like you have a 1-year, when you first become a federal employee, you have a 1-year probationary period where it's really easy to get fired if you screw up. And then after that, there's kind of 2 years until you're sort of tenured into the federal government. And that 3-year mark where you get tenured in the federal government is where you can start applying for MAP jobs. It gives you that special status. And so the career conditional means that you're a federal government, but there are conditions on it. And then that can, those conditions can go away depending on time, performance, and position that you're in. An HR person would have a much better answer to that question, I'm sure. But layman's terms, that's how I interpret it.
Great. Okay, next question is, I have one person note that people who are federal employees but have only held term positions do not qualify for competitive service jobs. Can you verify that, Amanda?
Yes, that's correct. So you do not get that status, that tenure that I was talking about through a term position.
Good to know. Next question. If you are a contractor for NOAA, would you be applying to a federal job under the MAP or DE job posting?
DE, so contractors, anybody who's never been affiliated with the government, DE. And I generally encourage everyone to apply under DE. Even if you have the status, it's worth applying under DE.
So if someone was a term appointment, they would also apply through the DE, not the MAP.
Correct. And if there's a direct hire, you know, that means you're not going MAP or DE, you're going direct hire. You're saying, I want that big candidate pool, give me anyone. So direct hire is one of the easiest ways to get a federal position. If I had to put it, you know, yeah. So that's one of the easiest ways to get in right now is if you qualify for those series. So DE or direct hire.
Great, thank you. Can you apply before you have the degree if you're qualifying based on education?
So it depends on how long it says your education has to be or what the requirements are. So for example, if you're in a PhD program and it says you need 2 years of education related, 2 years of post-undergraduate education, right? And you're 3 years into your PhD, check, you check that box. But if you're in a 2-year master's program and you're only a year in and it needs 2 years of education, and then you wouldn't meet it based on education alone. So you could potentially, you know, it depends. That's why you have to read that education section really, really carefully, because it will say how many years of education, it will say what type of education, you know, if it's a degree versus your coursework. So the answer to that is it depends.
Thanks, Amanda. Our next question, in your experience, what is the typical time scale from the time the position closes until a person can get called for an interview?
Ooh, so this is super frustrating and variable. So we have a hiring timeline that's supposed to go really, really fast. And it is really difficult to actually hire that fast in the federal government because of all the steps that need to happen. So I don't know what there's it's like a 90-day or 60-day hiring timeline. Even when I work really, really hard to make that, it doesn't often happen. But the HR people frequently turn these things around very quickly. So the date, like let's say, you know, the job closes on a Monday. If you're lucky, like I've been, to have really great HR professionals working with you and reviewing the candidates, I have occasionally gotten lists of 100+ people in less than a week or 2 weeks. At that point in time, then the hiring manager has to get together a panel, and usually you don't fully know when this is going to come. So you try and be ready, right, to have a hiring panel ready. And then you ship out the application packages and have everyone review them. And that can usually take like a week or two, depending on how prepared people are. So now on the fast track, we're 2 weeks in. On the slow track, we're one month in. And then at that point in time, reach out. So, but I've seen it, like there's been times where I've thought a position was going to post at a point in time, and then they post it just the day that we're going to go out and do some field work, or just the day that like my whole panel's on vacation because school's out somewhere, and so we don't get around to it for a couple weeks. So I always tell people, don't panic if you haven't heard and it's been a month or maybe 2. The HR people get really stressed when we take that long, because we're supposed to turn it around within 30 days. Like we get the list of candidates and we're supposed to have selections made within 30 days. But it can be really hard to get people together to review the applicant lists and to find time to do the interviews and everything in that. So like the fastest I've ever seen people get reached out to is like 1 to 2 weeks, and that's like amazing when it happens. But often it's more like 3-4 weeks, if I'm being honest, or later sometimes.
Good to know. This might be more of a hiring manager question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Do prior federal internships need an SF50, or would they even be provided that?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't know. I know HR people who I can ask though.
Great. We can follow up on that question later. Okay, our next question. I routinely do not include my salary in current previous employment positions. Are applications deemed ineligible for this if this information is not included?
I have seen people have their applications deemed ineligible for not including their salary. I think it's really weird. I get it. But because it's under the requirements section, just know that if you don't include it, there's a chance you might get through without it. But I've seen, you know, and we've had several cases where that's happened, where people have been excluded for not including their salary.
Good to know. We've had some questions about direct hire. Is there a way to filter on USAJobs to find only direct hire positions? Or are there any tips to finding direct hire job postings?
Yeah, so I don't know how it works across the different agencies and whatnot, but when you go into USA Jobs and you can search, you can type in NOAA and then you can do keywords, and so you can search for direct hire and see what shows up. In general, at any given time, NOAA maybe has 3 or 4 tabs of jobs open. So I find in my experience that the USA Jobs filters aren't always perfect. So if you're aggressively searching for a job, put on those filters. You can do like it's kind of a job query sort of thing where you put in like, I'm looking for jobs in this place at this level in these types of series, and it'll send you a weekly email and whatnot. And so you can get like a hint at what that's looking like. But I also just recommend people to, like look actively and put a little bit of time in, because it will occasionally miss things. So there's a pretty good search feature, but it's not perfect in my experience.
Good to know. Okay, we have a little more detailed question. USA Jobs limits the number of resumes you can upload or build at one time to 5. And since every job seems to have different, extremely specific items it's looking for in your resume, how do you apply to more than 5 jobs at a time? And since the government process can take a while, is there any time period after which it's okay to delete a resume to submit a new application without jeopardizing your previous applications?
So I don't know exactly for sure, because I've never applied for more than 5 jobs at a time, or at least I haven't for a very long time. I think when I came out of my Sea Grant fellowship I did, but other than that I haven't. So I don't know how you would handle it if you had 5 or more job applications going at a time. But remember, I said, I'll go back to the slide right here, you can call and email the monster people and the agency contact people. Those are the people who would be able to answer that. I do delete resumes after a while because they get out of date and whatnot. I am one of those people who does tailor my resume for every job I apply for, but that's probably because of where I am in my career too, is that I don't apply for jobs. I'm not like mass applying for jobs at this point in time, or applying at all right now. So you can delete them. I recommend people to sort of keep a record of them, because you never know when you're going to find a similar job and want to come back to that version and work off of that versus something else. But once if I applied for a job and they say I didn't get the job, then I delete the resume. So that's how I approach it. And then if you can what you do, I don't even want to make an assumption. Call the HR people, monster people, and ask them about can you delete a resume while you're applying for a job? Because I would hate to give the wrong advice on that.
Thank you. Okay, since you mentioned Sea Grant, we do have a few questions. Do Knaus Fellows receive an SF50 to apply to federal jobs, or is there a special authorities included with hiring Knaus Fellows?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So recently there was the passage of a law called the Conservation Corps Act, which gave some direct hire authority to NOAA for people who came out of particular education and pipeline programs. And so the Knaus Fellowship is one of those. There's other programs like the EPP program, the PEP program. There's a bunch of programs that NOAA Office of Education in particular, but also Sea Grant through the Knaus Fellowship, have put together that allow people to be in a pipeline program where we're trying to bring in people for the next generation of the workforce. And the Conservation Corps Act is one way that those people can get a sort of an inside or a separate avenue to get a federal job. So they can apply through the normal approach, but they can also apply through these Conservation Corps Act announcements. And actually a hiring manager, if they know someone is Conservation Corps eligible because they meet the requirements of the programs that contribute to that, then the hiring manager can actually hire them without even like fully going through this whole announcement process in general. So it's a very interesting hiring authority, and there have been some great presentations done in NOAA on that. And if you fall in one of those categories, if you've come through an Office of Education program or Sea Grant, Knaus, or PopDi Economics Fellowship program, I encourage you to work with the program managers from those programs to understand that, because there are time limitations and requirements around those.
Thank you so much. Talking about the submittal of resumes, as a hiring official, the default resume format that candidates fill out often produces this large block of text that, that are hard to wade through. Is it clear how to fill out these default resumes for readability or preferences to have them upload more readable versions?
So USAJobs itself has done a great job over the last 5 years of making it look better for the hiring manager, because it used to be really, really, really difficult to read the outputs of that process, and now it's significantly better. You have the ability to choose to use that resume builder format or to create your own resume separately. If you create your own resume separately, make sure you pay extra special attention to that requirement section, because part of what the resume builder does is it forces you to fill in all the things that are related to those requirements. If you use the resume builder, it's just a standard format and you have no control over that. Hiring managers, though, are trained that we cannot judge anyone more or less than other candidates based on the use of that resume builder. So even if it doesn't look as pretty as a resume that has been like made on its own in a different format with typeface changes and bold and underlined and whatnot, we cannot treat that resume as less than because they met the requirements by using that resume builder. So the safe thing to do is use the resume builder. But I see lots of people, and I'm one of those people too, who my resume is not built through the resume builder. And that can work too. Just you got to pay extra attention to the requirements section.
Great, thank you. Let me look for couple more questions here. If you get an offer, what can an applicant negotiate?
Great question. So there are some things you can and can't negotiate. It never hurts to ask, because I don't think there's necessarily an exhaustive list. So, I was a negotiator for a while, so it's like you can always ask and people can say no. So I'd start with that. The traditional things that people tend to negotiate are salary, start date, leave accrual, so that time in service. Like if you've been a contractor with NOAA for 15 years, you can try and get those 15 years to count towards your time in service for the purpose of leave accrual, which gives you a higher level of vacation time when you start. You can negotiate, let's see, if relocation or recruitment incentives are involved, you can negotiate those sorts of things. So remember that section in the thing that said, relocation or recruitment incentives are allowed. If those are allowed, then you can negotiate something to help you move if you're moving for the job. A recruitment incentive can be something like helping with your college loans, things like that. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can negotiate. If you're a current federal employee, you can try and negotiate your salary, but there are sort of standard rules of like a 6% increase to salary if the position allows it. So there, it does depend a little bit on the position that you're in, but those are generally the types of things I see people negotiate.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to grab 2 more questions. With the magic language that you mentioned, does that impact how someone should write a cover letter, given that other similar positions could pull from that list?
I don't think it should, because if you're applying for a specific position as announced, you're applying for that position as announced, right? And if someone is choosing to hire you for a different position, they're going to know as a hiring manager that you didn't apply for an announcement they crafted just for you, that they're trying to use that as a way to expedite their hiring process. That being said, I wouldn't recommend including something in your cover letter that says, this is the only job I would ever want. I can't imagine doing anything else, if you would want to be considered for something else necessary. I mean, again, people don't hold it against you because they know you're trying to express yourself. But don't say anything about like, I never want to work for this organization, or I doubt anyone would say that, but those would be the only ways I would say that it would hurt you.
Great. Last question. Amanda, do you foresee a large increase in NOAA job postings if the current administration's infrastructure climate bill is passed?
Oh, that is a question that is so far beyond my level of expertise and knowledge. I don't know. In general, I think the trends for NOAA hiring have been fairly stable, and they're based on a lot of different factors, but budget being one of them. So paying attention to authorities coming from Congress, paying attention from priorities coming out of the White House, paying attention to where budgets are growing. Those are all things that can give you a sense of where jobs may pop up. But I don't actually know the answer to that specific case.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you everyone for tuning in. There were a ton of questions and we are not able to get to all of them. I will pass them on to Amanda, and maybe with some magic from her hiring friends, we can get some more answers. But as it is, we do have to end our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Amanda, for giving an amazing presentation. Stay tuned for more professional development presentations between the library and the NOAA Pride Employee Resources Group. But I want to thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there.